Hello, welcome to this edition of Inside Story with OC Vince, your host. This is African Free Press TV that reports Africa from a refreshing perspective to the world. Now, on this edition of Inside Story, my focus of discussion today will look at this massive migration of people that try to cross the Mediterranean into Europe. You may have heard about this news of African people from the Middle East trying to get across to Europe, and many of them, thousands, hundreds, are going through inhuman experiences across the world. Now, the focus today is to look what is happening, why this human tsunami into Europe. Stay tuned with us on this edition of Inside Story with OC Vince. Remember, this African Free Press TV, where we report Africa from a refreshing perspective to the world. Remember, you can be able to like our page at facebook.com/africanfreepress.com, or you can follow our Twitter handle at African Free Press, or check out our fantastic website www.africanfreepress.com. Come home now, let's talk about Africa. The issue about the massive human migration, both Africans and non-Africans, from the Middle East. Syria, Afghanistan, like Libyans, Somalians, even Nigerians are rushing out of Africa. It's not new that a lot of people want to go to Europe for a better world, for a better life. It's not new. But in the past couple of months, there's been this, as if there was a whistle being blown by people to force themselves to cross the Mediterranean Sea into Europe. Let me give you more information about this. Recently, the EU countries are saying in the month of July alone, they had about 107,000 people crossing over. In the past couple of months, they've got about 350,000 people from Middle East and Africa crossing over to Europe for a better life. Last year, it was less than 100,000, 120,000 people. But this year alone, the year is not yet over, we've got about 350,000 already. And now, look at the landmark they used to cross over. You've got the people that cross over from Libya into some parts of Greece, their islands. And then you've got the people that try to cross into through Lampedusa into Italy. That is the most dangerous route. So if you want to take on this route, I'm not an expert, but based on information on global news handles, do not try to use this route. It's very dangerous, and you've got a lot of robbers, gang members that try to encourage people, that take so much amount of money from people to take them across to Europe. A lot of people have died and are still dying on the Mediterranean Sea. You don't want to be part of that. Africa has actually got a lot of potential for you if you've got creative ideas. Trust me, when you get across to Europe, you find that most of the ideas you have has already been tested. You will not have the papers, the documentation, the funding to be able to live out your life or plan your creative ideas. Africa is a fantastic place to you. Now, remember, you have to ask yourself this question: why are so many people from the Middle East moving across to Europe for a better life? Now, the war could be one of the reasons. Syria. The government of Syria today is struggling to keep the country. Libya. The Libyan government has fallen. Afghanistan. The government over there is struggling. Iraq. They are struggling. And what is happening? A lot of school of thought, not my own thought, but a school of thought is saying that the war that we have started by the Western powers is the cause in Libya, for example. In the absence of Muammar Gaddafi, the current government, after the war and the death of Muammar Gaddafi, could not manage the country. You've got a lot of terrorist groups coming into these holes or these gaps that were left by the Western powers that came to fight the war. And now there is terror, there is anarchy, there is lawlessness in Libya. So people are looking for a better life. In Syria, the same case. Assad is struggling because the Western powers want him out. And what do they leave in the gap? You've got a lot of issues about Islamist organizations. You've got fundamentalists. You've got terrorist groups. You've got even the rebel groups. There's a lot of chaos and anarchy, killing, human abuse, rape, death, hunger, starvation. So who wants to stay behind? They all want to go back. I recently saw a picture of a certain street in Syria when there was peace and what it is now. It's disaster, it's anarchy, it's inhuman. So everybody wants to leave. Now look at the issue of Afghanistan. The same war, according to the school of thought from the Western powers, and they left a void, a gap that is yet to be filled. So there is hunger, poverty, lawlessness, killings, terrorism, gangs, armed robbery. There is no peace. So people are moving for a better life. Iraq, almost every week you hear about primary and secondary bombings that kill thousands and hundreds of people in Iraq. So people want to leave. I think it's a warning sign that what people are saying to the Western powers, even though you must fight this war to sack all these leaders, but when you finish this war, you must make arrangements for people to have peace. Because right now people are being forced to migrate. It's not even voluntary, it's involuntary, because they don't have an option. They cannot stay. Where you be forced to worship in a certain way, or you will die. Where you be forced by gangs and terrorist organizations to control your life. So families are living in droves. Now what should they do? So it's not even a voluntary migration. It's an involuntary, forced, because of poverty, because of the war. So what are we talking about? So it's like the people of Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq are now going back to the continent or the countries that played a role in the wars that made them or left them in poverty. Now let's look at that perspective now. We are saying, who taught them, who blew the whistle for them to start moving in such huge numbers? 350,000 in the past 4 months is a huge number. Now look at the movement. Most of them arrive in Turkey. From Turkey they move into Greece. From Greece they move into Macedonia, into some parts of Serbia, into Hungary, into Austria, and now with the target of going into Germany, who has a fantastic, as I heard, plans for asylum seekers. Now remember, this route could be the same route that most of the Europeans that are fighting for the ISIS or the ISIL in Syria use similar routes of Greece into Turkey and into Syria to go and fight. So who gave them this information about this route to move? That is a very point of perspective that we have to look forward into. Remember, if you're just joining us, this is African Free Press TV, where we report Africa from a refreshing perspective to you. And the focus of discussion today is to look at this massive human tsunami of Middle Easterners, mostly, and some Africans trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea into Europe. It's been happening for the past decades or 2 decades, but in the past 4 months, it's been like a massive demand, a massive force. It's become a force in the sense that in some countries like Austria or Serbia, when they tried to restrain the migrants from moving forward into Europe, some of them actually started to do protesting. Some of them even forced their way against the police officers or the border security officers, to the extent that Austria, for example, has built this razor-sharp fence to stop this migration from occurring. But even today, a lot of the migrants are beginning to arrive in the cities of Germany. But the question for us here is, has Europe got what it takes to manage this crisis of human influx? Can they manage it? Because there's going to be cultural clashes. There's going to be ethnic clashes. There could be even religious clashes because of different way of worshipping, and people coming from different cultures, different ideology into certain countries. And some are even saying there could even be terrorists among these massive numbers. There could be armed robbers, criminals that are not documented, and many of them don't even want to get their fingerprints taken in certain countries across. I think it should be around Macedonia or Austria. They don't want their fingerprints to be taken. And you ask yourself a question: for you not to want your fingerprints to be taken by the country you're coming into to seek asylum or to seek refuge, it leaves a question that these guys may be criminals or even terrorists. The question here, if you go to the borders of France and Calais, you've got this massive number of migrants trying to force themselves into UK. Across Europe, can Europe handle this? Is the world ready for this human tsunami into Europe? And what has Europe done about it? What is African Union doing about this? We all know that on the 14th of September, all the internal ministers of certain European countries are coming to meet in Belgium to discuss about this human tsunami. I think it's time for the world to ask themselves question. Is this going to change the configuration of the world? Is it going to affect social welfare systems in Europe? Is it going to affect the poverty level in Europe? Because you could end up having loads of people living roughly in the streets of Europe. Some of them could turn to criminals, muggers, because when you are poor, when you haven't got money, when you're not documented, when you're not an asylum seeker, remember, an asylum seeker is the person that applied to seek refuge. So they're following a due diligence protocol. But those that don't want to follow that due diligence protocol end up living carelessly, doing all kinds of menial jobs, and even criminality, and even terrorism. So on this edition, we have talked about this issue of human tsunami that trying to force themselves voluntarily or involuntarily into Europe for a better life. What has EU done about this? What is America doing about it? Because America may not be close to Africa like Europe, but they have a role to play in this. It's high time that the American government, the European government, the African government, the Middle Eastern government sit down together to find a lasting solution to the issue or the cause that made people to live in war zones, to live in poverty, and now their need to cross voluntarily or involuntarily into a better life. They are human beings. We have to look after them. Thank you for listening to this edition of Inside Story with O.C. Vince. Remember, this is African Free Press TV, where we report Africa from a refreshing perspective to the world. You can like our website or check out our website at www.africanfreepress.com, or check out our Facebook /AfricanFreePress.com, or like our Twitter handle at African Free Press. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. God bless you.